What do you think it is that makes people want to watch somebody in like excruciating pain?
I mean, it's the same with like UFC. They want to see people in pain. It's just,
well, yeah, I mean, it's a good question. Like UFC, I mean, WWF, why do people love horror movies? Who wants to go to a movie and sit there and watch tragic things happen to other humans? It's a weird, visceral human thing that we like our emotions to be pushed to a certain edge. And I think where we got sort of a lightning in the bottle experience with Brave Wilderness was people just didn't think that I would go through with these things. And that's when the term clickbait was sort of coined, where there were a lot of people on YouTube, specifically vloggers and stuff like that were like, whoa, crazy moment. And they would give you a thumbnail and a title, and you'd watch a 10-minute video and be like, dude, nothing that you titled this or thumbnailed it was part of the video. Yet here's us with these giant alien looking insects and a finger and a stinger, and you're like, dude, really there's no way. And then when you see me catch this thing, and then you see me at the table, and then you see me like, they're like, is this really happening? And then to see it and to always be able to get that shot where you can see the stinger go in, you can see my arm swelling, like we don't fake it. You know what I mean? It really was happening. And I think people just gravitated towards that because they're so afraid of these animals. Really think about it. It doesn't matter what it is that I've been bitten or stung by, the fear of being bitten by an alligator or a centipede or stung by a giant tarantula hawk, for most people is the worst case nightmare scenario. So for them to be able to watch it happen to somebody else, way better than ever experiencing it yourself.
So Jason and I started this show really to give ourselves an excuse to have conversations with interesting people that do interesting things. And it's hard to think of somebody who fits that description much better than this guy. Coyote Peterson is a filmmaker. He's got 20 million subscribers on his YouTube channel called Brave Wilderness. So there's a pretty good chance that you don't actually need this introduction of him at all. But he's also a passionate advocate for conservation and wildlife education. And while those two things are not in and of themselves unique, the way he chooses to go about doing them is. He primarily rose to prominence by getting bitten and stung by some of the most terrifying things I've ever seen or heard about. Things called tarantula hawks and executioner wasps and stuff that if I found out was anywhere near me, I would just move to a different state. But he does these things in the name of education and primarily for children. Right now, the only thing my daughter wants to watch is a video where he just rolls around in animal feces for like 14 minutes in the name of education. So if you liked it, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the conversations that we're going to be having with other people in the future. But as always, this episode is brought to you by the Phipps Team and 509realestate.com. If you or anybody you know is looking to buy a home anytime soon or anytime at all. But right now, here's Coyote Peterson. So checking my notes here, it says you're a YouTube guy?
I've been on YouTube for a while. Yeah.
You're Cleveland, right?
Yeah, Cleveland originally. We're currently based out of Columbus, Ohio, which is where I've been since I was in college at the Ohio State University.
Okay. You a sports guy?
Yes, NBA basketball fanatic, and always through and through Buckeye fan, no matter what sport it is.
Okay.
But I grew up loving the NBA and still love it today.
What's your team?
When I was younger, the Orlando Magic. I was a huge fan of Penny Hardaway and Shaquille O'Neal and that whole dynasty that almost was something amazing. Obviously, Michael Jordan fan through and through as well. But of course, being from Cleveland, I'm also a LeBron fan, no matter where he is, whether he's in Cleveland or LA or wherever it might be. So
right. Me too. I'm a huge Lakers fan, so it works out.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I was just hearing somebody talk about like in the NBA in particular, it seems to be common for people to follow players rather than teams, like more common in the NBA than in other sports.
I could see that. And I think one of the things today that is a little bit different as compared to at least what I remember as a kid is people are hopping around from team to team all the time. It seems like James Harden just swapped teams again. It's tough to really commit to a team if you've got a favorite player and that favorite player is bouncing from spot to spot.
Any NFL or anything like that? I only ask because there's so much going on with the Browns right now.
Yeah, no, I'm I guess I'd say a fair weather Browns fan. Unfortunately, the Browns are never really in fair weather, it seems like. So yeah.
Right.
I've grown up with all the travesty that has been the Browns, but I loved Bernie Kosar back in the day when I was a kid.
Yeah.
There you go. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, they just, I mean, they make a move at quarterback now, and they can't even do that without some kind of controversy, you know?
Oh,
The
the
curse
Deshaun
of
Watson?
Cleveland.
Yeah.
The curse
Yeah.
of Cleveland.
And they paid him the full franchise fee, 230 million.
Yeah.
They're poor for years.
Yeah.
So I heard you're no longer intentionally doing the more intentional stinging and biting.
That's true, but it's also not completely true because you can never say never, right? So we always find a way to selectively produce some content that's going to have that extreme edge to it. Like, for example, I've got an episode coming out in a few weeks that centers around mosquitoes, which, if you didn't know, is technically the deadliest animal in the world. We worked with an entomology team and went out to a remote island in the Florida Keys, which is sort of the target zone for disease influx potential into the United States.
Right.
We're looking for a specific mosquito species, and the good news is we did not find any breeding at the time, but they bred 1,000 of them in captivity for me, so I could place my arm into an enclosure with 1,000 of them and show you what getting massacred by mosquitoes looks like. So, we're trying to find real interesting approaches to still create extreme content, and we've got a few other things up our sleeves this summer. So yeah, if you love that content, we've always got more.
How do you check for things like, malaria or like, what's the other one? What's the big mosquito one?
West Nile virus?
West Nile, that's what I'm looking for.
Well, in an instance like this, because these mosquitoes were bred in captivity, we know that there's no chance of disease, and mosquitoes can carry a host of different diseases. Anything that is a sort of parasitic, let me hop on my host and suck out your blood, has the potential for disease transmission. I actually just got over having something called tick bite fever, which I got in South Africa from a tick that embedded itself in my leg. But we do a lot of research ahead of time. And with this mosquito scenario specifically, because they were raised in captivity, we know they were completely free of disease.
Okay. Well, so obviously, your main angle wasn't to just start out by getting to borrow a phrase, massacred by things.
Yeah.
But at this point in your life, your job or your career kind of boils down to getting bitten, stung by frightening things. And obviously, there's more to you than that, but it's sort of what you're known for. Obviously, what you're known for. Is that fair to say? Yeah,
certainly the virality of what those early bite and sting episodes helped launch the Brave Wilderness brand into the stratosphere, right? So when my business partner, Mark Vins, and I started Brave Wilderness, and we've been producing content for almost 2 years before we did anything real extreme. And we just kind of, stumbled into it, to be honest with you. Anybody who's had the chance to hold that moniker of wildlife show adventure or presenter will tell you, first and foremost, you're not doing a good job if you're getting bitten all the time. So it was really weird to sort of flip the script and say, well, what would the audience do if you were intentionally getting bit? How would they react to that? And we learned very quickly that it was very, very popular, and that popularity helped bring the audience into some of our episodes that we felt had a deeper, more conservation-based message, right? Because even the bite and sting stuff has very valuable education to it. And that was how we cleverly worked the content into being not just shock and awe. Right? We didn't want to be Jackass Part 2.
Right.
We wanted to still be science and make people not afraid of these animals. But that sort of became the magnet for getting people in to watch an episode about something like an ocelot or manatees or orcas or, dozens and dozens of other species that you've seen me interact with that did not bite or sting me.
Well, did you ever at any point wish that you had a different job?
Oh, gosh, absolutely not. My background is in screenwriting, producing, and directing. So the only thing I would be doing other than this at this point would probably be producing independent films. I'm never a guy that intended to be in front of the camera. I just sort of fell into it because I had this natural ability to interact with animals. You know, I mean, you can say to anybody, go out there and jump on an alligator, and 99.9% of those people are going to say there's absolutely no way.
Sure.
For some reason, I am capable of doing what that is, recognizing how animals move, recognizing their behavior, and feeling like I can immerse myself into the environment in a way that I don't feel as threatening as I possibly could be. Remember, animals are always going to perceive humans as a threat first and foremost. So even a predator is going to go in the opposite direction unless it's snuck up on you and you're making yourself look like a prey item. So to have this job now, I mean, it's certainly something that I thought about as a kid, but once I got into college and, you know, evolving into adulthood, it's like, well, what are the odds that I'm going to ever become one of the 10 people to be a wildlife show host? You know, I mean, there's very few of them that you recognize and stood any sort of test of time, if that makes sense.
Right. So you guys, one of the reasons that, one of the things that attracts me to your channel, and I think attracted, anybody to your channel, was like the cinematic quality of what you were doing. You know, like you could have just filmed it with a phone, but you guys did things like using the drone shots. And what came first, your interest in animals or your interest in cinematography?
Yeah, definitely my interest in animals. I mean, as a kid, you know, animals were everything to me. And I was being influenced at an insanely young age without knowing it, right? So here's the example I always give. Like, my favorite movie as a child, before there was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Jurassic Park, was Jaws. So my mom used to rent the Jaws VHS tape from the video store. Seriously, when I was like maybe 5 or 6 years old, the old VHS tape, and I would pause the VHS tape. I don't know if you guys remember VHS tapes, but like the image would go, it would like shake on the screen. And I would trace the images of the shark for the few shots that was actually visible. I would take those tracings, and then I would sit there and practice drawing sharks because I love great white sharks. All the while, I would have to kind of watch the movie to get to that point. So Steven Spielberg was influencing me in childhood, even though I didn't know who he was. And then obviously once I saw E.T., loved that, still didn't know who Steven was. Jurassic Park essentially defined my childhood, and I knew the name, but I knew nothing about filmmaking. So as I got older and got into college, I was like, man, like, I really want to understand, how do you evoke that sort of emotion in a viewer? How do you write the story? How do you get those images? How do you put that to music? And how do you make somebody emotionally feel something for a completely fictitious scenario? And once I started getting into that, it's what I really wanted to do with my career. So the fact that it all came around full circle and we found a way to make animals and adventure, that storytelling combination, honestly was a little bit of right place, right time. Tragically, Steve Irwin had passed away, and right in that sort of same rise, Bear Grylls was reaching his pinnacle with Man vs. Wild. And my producing partners and I were working on some independent film projects at the time. We got real close to getting an independent film financed for about $5 million. And by close, I mean literally the 1 yard line, getting ready to sign contracts with a major executive producer in California that probably would have been able to make this film happen. And we pivoted on a dime pretty much and went in this animal direction because Steve passed away. We saw what Bear was doing, but the difference where we wanted to fit in the middle is that Bear was catching and eating animals to teach you how to survive.
Right.
But the cinematography style, the music, the editing, we were like, man, that's the future. But how do we take Steve's message of education, conservation, and love for animals and marry those two things together? So you can see where it became this perfect sort of tornado of everything at the right place, right time.
What was that film about? The one that almost got financed?
I don't want to give anything away because it's actually still technically an in development project, but it centers around the Vietnam War era in the mid 60s. And it's a story about the choices we make in life and the consequences that follow, and whether or not it's fate or if everything happens because of coincidence. So it's a pretty cool movie that takes place in the Pacific Northwest, and it's got these Vietnam War thematics based with certain things that these characters are struggling with in their own wilderness struggle, so to speak.
That's where we're at.
Yeah, that's where we live, Pacific Northwest.
Okay,
I'm actually driving to the rainforest this weekend.
Oh, what part of the Pacific Northwest are you guys in?
We're in Tri-Cities, kind of the desert side of the state.
Yeah.
Okay.
It doesn't rain here.
Mm-mm.
Gotcha.
Lots
Okay,
of coyotes.
I'm gonna actually be in British Columbia in 2 weeks. We're doing an episode on white sturgeon, which are huge prehistoric looking fish. Essentially, the reason we have the idea of the Loch Ness monster is this animal. So we're making a very Loch Ness monster themed episode and then showing people hopefully a really large sturgeon if we can catch one.
Yeah, there's huge sturgeon here because the Columbia runs right through where we live.
Yep.
So there's 10, 12 footers all over the place.
Yep,
So.
that's where we'll be filming.
So let's talk about production. Are you still
Yeah.
involved in that? And what, if so, what do you do now versus what you used to do? Did you used to do everything, or did you always have a team behind you? Like, what are your passions within the production part of it?
Yeah, so I'm involved in absolutely every aspect of the Brave Wilderness brand, from the design and development of a board game, t-shirts, lunch boxes, right down to the post-production that you see with videos. Now, I no longer sit in front of the computers and edit, but when Mark and I first launched Brave Wilderness, we were essentially the only two that were doing this full time. We still had day jobs for 2014, 15, and we finally quit our normal day jobs in June of 2016. So it took us 2.5 years before the YouTube channel was generating enough revenue to where we felt comfortable quitting our day jobs. So that meant that all of our vacation time, all of our weekends, all of our extra anything was spent going on trips to film content, Mark shooting, me hosting, me writing the voiceover scripts, me editing and putting everything together. And then we would have like these midnight crash sessions where at that time we were uploading like 3 pieces of content a week. So we might get together on a Monday night and a Thursday night and crush through final edits on 3 episodes so that we could release on like Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, right? So it was absolutely mind-bending to think of how much work we did in those early stages. But I mention that because anybody that watches this, that's like, man, I would love to make a YouTube channel. Like, how difficult is it really? Insanely difficult, because the commitment to stay consistent is the hardest aspect. If you can go out and tell a single story and capture that on camera, cut it together and actually have it be like, wow, I'm super proud of this, I'm going to share it with my audience. You can do that once. It's a huge accomplishment. I mean, you guys know this, just starting a podcast and getting rocking and rolling takes a lot of work. So imagine producing content out in the wild with animals, facing elements, facing the unknowns, and doing that consistently week in and week out for years. That's what we've done with Brave Wilderness, essentially.
Well, I'm actually deeply interested in what that beginning was like for you, because like, as you mentioned, we know what it's like to put, a considerable amount of work into something without any notoriety or any clicks or anything like that. But you're doing something. Was there anything early on that was particularly, dangerous or strenuous for you during those early days that just didn't catch on? And at any point during that, were you thinking like, why am I putting myself in this position for nothing?
So between 2009 and 2014, right? So publicly, people know Brave Wilderness launched as a YouTube channel in September of 2014. But between 2009 and 2014, we were developing this concept. Originally, Brave Wilderness was just something called the Reptile Show. And it was basically me going out catching snapping turtles and other reptiles. And, we realized very early on that was way too limiting, because we would tell people or pitch this idea of like going out to catch snakes, and people would be like, whoa, dude, snakes, afraid of snakes, don't want anything to do with snakes. We're like, oh yeah, I guess not everybody likes snakes and snapping turtles. Well, maybe we should expand this and turn it more into all animals. So that's kind of how Brave Wilderness evolved, or I should say the Reptile Show evolved into Brave Wilderness. So in that expansive time, we came up with Brave Wilderness pretty early on in the run of that, like 2009 into 2010. And there's a solid 4 years in there where we pitched this as a TV show. We made elaborate sizzle reels and pitch decks and travel places. We worked our butts off to try to get somebody to believe in this, and everybody told us no. And that was primarily because Steve Irwin had passed away. And this is just my belief, my opinion, that when they saw the tragedy that happened with Steve, they were like, nope, humans interacting with animals, never going to happen again. It was way too much for society. And now we have planet Earth. People can see animals from a distance with a long lens. I didn't grow up like that, right? I grew up with Marty Stauffer, Jack Hanna, Austin Stevens, Steve Irwin, Jeff Corwin. I mean, these guys were in the thick of it doing what I was doing when I was a kid, catching stuff with their bare hands. So we believed that was still going to be entertaining. And as we developed and got closer to the opportunity to launch what became the YouTube channel, it all came to this point where Mark and I were essentially down to literally the last $2,500 that we had raised from angel investors, where we went out to this conference in Santa Monica called Real Stream. So there's something called Real Screen that is to pitch TV shows. Real Stream was like this new hot digital thing because at the time, YouTube had just a couple years earlier become monetized. Advertising buyers were starting to push money into the AdSense world. So we went out there with our little sizzle reels and these big dreams. Long story short, ended up pitching a couple of the right people that then became Discovery Digital Networks, which at the time was the branch that Discovery Communications that owns Discovery Channel, Animal Planet, Oprah Winfrey, et cetera, that whole conglomerate. They're like, oh yeah, we need one of these digital divisions. And they had absolutely no budget, but we convinced them to give us distribution. And we were 100% convinced that if we showed them what we could do, we'd get to Animal Planet. They'd be like, yeah, these guys don't have any place in the digital space. Give them a TV show. So we raised a very small amount of additional angel investment to produce 12 episodes of the show that was called Breaking Trail, which was the first thing we launched our YouTube channel as. We recognized that 12 episodes wasn't going to get us very far. We ended up producing 52 episodes in a matter of 3 months in 3 strategic locations: Montana, Florida, and Arizona. And that essentially launched the YouTube channel. And that was September of 2014 that launched. And we've really kind of never looked back. But there were some hairy moments where we had to separate the channel away from Discovery Communications because their digital side was literally doing this while we were doing that. And we're like, ugh, this is bad. They literally had the keys to our YouTube channel. Now, granted, we owned all the content. Okay. And that was the most advantageous thing that Mark and I did from day one. And for anybody out there that wants to get into the entertainment industry, the best advice I can ever give is get yourself an amazing entertainment attorney who's going to protect your IP. Your intellectual property is the most valuable thing you will ever have. And Mark and I owned everything: the Brave Wilderness name, Be Brave, Stay Wild as a trademark and a tagline, Coyote Peterson LLC, Wilderness Productions, and all of the content that we were producing. And because Discovery Communications couldn't finance those first 12 episodes and we had to pay for it, we just owned everything moving forward, which was kind of a crazy thing that was not happening at all in the entertainment industry. It was still music conglomerates, studios, television networks buying up content, or essentially the IP rights, and locking down talent that we cleverly avoided. So Coyote Peterson, despite what anybody might think, even in the early days, we were never financed and made by Discovery Communications. We have always been completely independent and own 100% of our IP.
Well, that's awesome.
Yeah,
I'm interested in the difference in your experience between having an Animal Planet show and having a YouTube channel. So obviously there's positives and negatives on either side.
Yeah.
Doing something like Animal Planet, was it a situation, or is it a situation where there are a bunch of cooks in the kitchen kind of telling you what you need to do?
So the relationship that we then had with Discovery many years later, right? So when we launched the YouTube channel, we were with Discovery's digital side. That dissipated. We separated away. Brave Wilderness exploded, right? 2016 is when the bite and stink stuff just went, and we're talking like hundreds of thousands of subscribers a day, which was just absolutely mind-boggling to think that many people were like, yep, we're going to get on board with this guy getting bitten and stung by stuff. We can't wait to see this Bullet Ant episode. And, a couple years later, like every network and their brother and sister were after us to do a series. I mean, you name it, we probably sat in the room and got pitched. But the big reason that Mark and I were just like, nah, it ain't going to happen, is because they wanted the IP. They wanted me to sign on exclusively. They wanted to absorb Brave Wilderness, but there was no buyout, right? It's not like somebody was coming in and be like, oh yeah, we'll drop 25 mil and we're going to own what that is. They basically were just like, here, we'll give you a crappy budget to make a show and we'll own your IP. So there was no chance. When we finally ended up doing the Animal Planet show, a contract that conversation started in 2017, bled into 18. We produced it in 18 and launched it in 19. We were in such a unique position to negotiate and navigate. And I give a lot of credit to my business partner, Mark, and our legal team for just navigating a never before seen contract in entertainment, the way that we partnered as a production company, Coyote Peterson, my own unique brand, the way we married all these things together that ultimately culminated in us having complete creative control of that show, right down to final cut, was pretty unheard of. Now, we do not own the intellectual property rights to Brave the Wild. That is owned by Discovery, but the team we worked with there believed in what this was. We had an amazing team. So when you say cooks in the kitchen, yes, we had a lot of cooks, but we were all cooking the same exact thing. So we would get notes back, but our EPs on that series, they would give their opinions, which were always very valid, well thought out opinions, like the best notes process ever. And it was like, oh, cool. Yeah, no, we didn't think of that, because sometimes you're so close to something, you need a valuable opinion to tell you how to pivot. But there just really wasn't a lot of it, because when we constructed the show, they knew what they wanted, which was bring what you're doing on Brave Wilderness to the Animal Planet level, where I can tell a longer narrative with a bigger budget. And originally they were like, can we do the bite and sting stuff? And I was like, History Channel, believe it or not, had pitched me. I'm sure you guys have heard of that Kings of Pain show. That show was originally pitched to me, and we kind of laughed them out of the room. We're like, dude, guys, number one, you are not offering us a budget nearly close to what we make just by producing these episodes on YouTube. Right. But I was like, look, guys, if I'm going to go do a television show for somebody, I want it to be the storytelling. I want it to be the art. I want it to be the animals and the conservation and education. Like, I don't want to have to get maimed by reticulated pythons and monitor lizards, which in my opinion is just ridiculous stunts, because those are serious injuries, right? That's like lacerations down through tendons and stuff like that. So, Animal Planet was very much on board with us doing what it is that we wanted. And, we had an amazing experience making those 18 episodes for Brave the Wild. The show didn't end up going forward for a multitude of different reasons, the biggest one being COVID. COVID hit in March of 2019. Brave the Wild launched in February of 2019. So I literally had finished my East and West Coast circuits for media. Mm-hmm. And then COVID happened, and it was just like, and that's it. How do you make an international show that is expensive to produce, timely to produce, and just do it in the United States? It didn't make any sense whatsoever.
Right. Is there a video you would say you're most proud of, something you put the most work into? You have a big body of work. So is there one that stands out that was like, yeah, this is something that when I look back on, I'm going to be most proud of?
Yeah. I mean, there's a handful that, I'm super proud of the accomplishments, not only from the storytelling side, but the big thing that I don't think a lot of the audience recognizes, which comes in good storytelling, you don't recognize how difficult it might have been to get some of these scenarios on camera. You know what I mean? We really pride ourselves in the amount of time and effort we put to find things naturally in the wild. We do not stage things. It's not like we bring a Parenti monitor out into Australia and let it go in the sand and like, okay, cool, go catch that lizard. And I mentioned the Parenti because it was one of the hour-long episodes we did for Brave the Wild. It was the most grueling search for an animal that we have ever endured. And we literally found that animal the very last day going to pick up a camera trap. And it was just me and our wildlife biologist, Mario. We didn't even have the camera team with us. It was two of us, a GoPro and one other camera, that ended up catching this like 5.5-foot lizard in the middle of the outback by ourselves. Like, it was the magic. It was like the universe put us up to that test to be like, if you can do this, you can do anything. So that piece stands out big time for me. But we've got one that's coming out in June that's all about rhino conservation, specifically rhinos in South Africa, both the black and white rhino, and a huge, massive fundraising campaign that we are launching to try to bring better protections to these animals. So right now, the thing I'm most proud of is the work that we're doing on the rhino episode.
And I was going to ask you about that. Is that your main focus is rhinos right now for the conservation? Or are you doing certain areas, locations, or where is your primary focus when it comes to conservation in the moment?
So we do a lot of, so like recently my business partner, Mark, did a project called Brave Mission that raised about $500,000 for Virunga National Park in the Congo. That was our big one last year. The rhinos one this year is upped even more. It's $1 million campaign for a reserve that we're partnered with in South Africa. So we're getting to the realm now where we're big enough to start chunking off like these big 6-figure, 7-figure moves if we can pull them off, right? Mm-hmm. But we do a lot of smaller philanthropy-oriented things. I'm on this thing called Cameo. I don't know if you've heard of it before. Oh, yeah, it's like you do like birthday shout-outs, right? Check it out. It's pretty cool. So I'm on that. And every time, so, people are paying for me to do birthday shout outs, all of that money goes towards conservation efforts. So we put together these little $5,000 chunks, right? And we'll pick, every, usually like 2 or 3 a quarter. Once we've hit like a $5,000 mark, to be like, cool, this one's for wolves. This one's for sloths. This one's for honeybees. So we'll go out and target specific groups or hear about stories or have people approach us and say, hey, look, we're trying to get this built at our reserve. Would you help? Yeah, cool. We'll come in and, smaller little things like that. And we don't publicize it a whole lot, but it's always happening in the background. The more we can give back to animals and conservation is always going to be the better.
That's awesome.
That's awesome. So you mentioned when when the channel started to gain traction was when the bite and sting stuff started. And that started with the snapping turtle. Is that right?
The alligator snapping turtle? Yeah. There was a video that we shot in our first batch of 52 that I was mentioning where I was intentionally quilled by a porcupine. And the funniest thing about that is at the time, that was one of the most popular episodes and it stood out because of the extreme nature, but I was never supposed to get quilled by that porcupine going into filming that episode. It was a porcupine that was being raised in captivity at a wildlife sanctuary in Montana. We were there to specifically film an episode about grizzly bears and what happens if you encounter a grizzly in the wild. What do you do if you get attacked? And they said, hey, look, we've got this young porcupine we've been raising. They're super cool. Do you want to film, a little segment? And at that point in time, the YouTube videos were very short, like 5-6 minutes maybe. And we're like, oh, cool, porcupines. Those are neat. People don't know a lot about this big North American rodent. And we brought the porcupine and it's like a little carrier out into a naturally environment looking area. And there's me sitting there next to a log and the porcupine handlers, so to speak, goes to get the porcupine out of its little thing. And he's wearing these leather gloves that are like up to here on his arms. And I was like, I don't have any gloves. He's like, oh yeah, trust me, you don't want to get quilled. And I was like, well, okay, yeah, no, probably not. But should I wear gloves if I'm interacting with it, like being around it? And then he kind of started spurting off these interesting facts about porcupine quills. And because they lived in an area where a lot of people's animals are quilled by porcupines, there's these big misnomers about what to do if your animal is quilled. And he's telling me this stuff, and we're literally on the spot producing this, like, holy cow, this is super interesting. And Damien was the handler's name. I was like, what would happen if I got quilled? He's like, I mean, you could. It's not going to be comfortable, but then you could show people the right way to do it. Literally, this was within 15 minutes of seeing the porcupine to cameras up, us being like, cool, we're going to get me quilled by the porcupine. And it was an absolute crap show because the spot we had picked to film, the lighting was perfect. And this is the cinematography and directing side of me. The lighting is perfect, but then the clouds broke. So we had all this dappled lighting spilling through, and the porcupine is dark in coloration. So the cameras were having so much trouble exposing for the porcupine without blowing out the background. I mean, it was an absolute crap show. We finished shooting it, and even when the quilling happened, we were like, okay, it was chaotic, got into post-production, and I'm cutting this episode together, and I'm just like, dude, it looks so bad. The lighting was so bad. we actually thought about not ever releasing it. And when we finally did, we were just like, well, we got to put out a piece of content. We need something. It was an edited episode. It went kind of crazy. I mean, I would think it was our first video to 10,000 views. Wow. And we were like, holy cow, like 10,000 views. And we were like, that's really interesting. And from there, in 2015, then it led to being bitten by that alligator snapping turtle, which again was a very impromptu concept that we kind of came up with on the spot. And the Sting Index stuff sort of came after that. So it started really with the porcupine.
Well, so the reason I ask is, like, obviously those were very pivotal moments for your life, you know, and the reason I ask is I'm interested in the process of kind of finding that angle, finding your voice.
Yeah. So again, any wildlife presenter is going to tell you you're not a good one if you're getting, you know, maimed by everything that you interact with. So the fact that that porcupine was such a weird twist, and then the way that the audience gravitated towards it, we were like, man, is there something here with that? After the alligator snapping turtle, which also kind of blew up, and people were like, whoa, this is crazy, because we did the turkey leg first, and we knew that if I put my arm into the mouth of that turtle, we knew what was going to happen, right? I know snapping turtles, but we're like, man, how do you really build up that visceral edge of your seat filmmaking movie magic, right? That's the Spielberg in my background, to be like, the editing, the music, the build something up to where people like this is not what's really good. Oh my gosh, this is really going to happen. He's going to put his arm in the mouth of that turtle. People had to keep watching, right? It's kind of like that car crash moment where you don't want to see a dead body, but you look anyways because you might see a dead body.
Yeah.
And once we recognized that formula and it started taking off, we leaned into it, but we leaned into it strategically by building that movie concept, right? The sequel. So once we saw the success of the harvester ants, then it was the fire ants. And then we were like, man, okay, the Sting thing, which was based off of Justin Schmidt, right? Famous entomologist. And the fact that he created the insect sting pain index. Again, I'm going to keep referencing Spielberg. We took a book and turned it into a movie. And we were like, what Justin did, I read his book, Sting of the Wild. I'm like, I'm not going to get stung by all these things. I'm going to go to the most extreme ones. And I'm going to take his idea and I'm going to turn it in to the movie narrative and put myself through the experiment and show you viscerally what this looks like. What does it feel like? It's one thing to read pages on the book and use your imagination. It's another thing to watch a human go through the experience. And once we did The Cow Killer, which came out in September of 2016, we were like, oh man, this is legit. That's when the channel exploded. And that's where I'm talking, like, we were getting hundreds of thousands of new subscribers in a day. And we were like, all right, we knew we had a tiger by the tail. And we said, now get the bullet ant. We strategically then moved to the warrior wasp. The warrior wasp turned into going backwards to get the Japanese giant hornet, which then led to us releasing the execution wasp, which is currently the king of sting. And then mixed in there, we had a couple of other clever things, like me doing the bee beard that went wrong and got stung 60 times in the face by bees. And there's a handful of other things that came in with the bites, but we very quickly separated the bites from the stings as well, so that the stings lived in their own category, hence giving us the opportunity to create merchandise around it. So there's a book called The King of Sting. There's also a book called The Beast of Bites, because if you separate them, there comes that Spielberg Lucas magic, where how do you build a brand and the merchandise off of an idea? So it was a lot of strategy, believe it or not.
Well, so with the bee beard, the intention is to not get stung. Okay. Is there a part of you when they begin stinging you that's thinking, great, this is great content?
Yeah.
No, there was not. It was insanely scary. Because it was not supposed to happen.
Sure.
And in complete defense of Chris, who was our bee expert, it was certainly not his fault. What happened, the truth of behind it, which we didn't put a lot of it into that story, but the truth behind what happened is the grouping of bees that we were originally putting on my face was a more docile strain of European honeybees. Now, there's a big difference between calm, docile stock of European honeybees and Africanized bees, right? What happened is where we were filming out in the middle of the desert, lo and behold, we somehow were close to there being an Africanized colony. And what happened is an Africanized bee sensed pheromones coming off of the pheromone thing on my neck, right? So I didn't even have a queen on my neck at that point. It was just a pheromone lure. And what happened is when a few of these Africanized bees came into the European colony, somebody stung. And the second a sting happens, the first sting I think came on my lip, they released a pheromone. And then another one stung and another one. And all of a sudden I said to Chris, hey man, I'm getting stung. It's like more than once. And he's like, really, dude? He's like, you shouldn't be getting stung. Are you sure? I'm like, dude, I am sure. Honeybee stings are insanely painful because they have a specific neurotoxin in their venom that is pain inducing specifically. And your face is incredibly sensitive. So my face is covered in bees. And all of a sudden the stings start coming and then they're trying to crawl into my eyes. And that's where in that episode, I'm like, I got to get them off. That was the scariest part because my face is covered and I'm trying to jump up and down because that's what you do. You jump to shake them off so that then they can fly. Chris had to smoke me. Dude, I'm getting stung on my neck and then my face started swelling. And the thing is, I had never been stung to my knowledge by a honeybee before that day. I've been stung by hornets and wasps, but growing up as a kid, I just was never stung by a honeybee. So I had no idea if I was going to have an allergic reaction. So like the guys are literally there waiting with epinephrine pens as we're watching my face go like a overcooked hot dog, because the danger is that if my neck starts swelling and my airwaves start getting cut off, that's game over, right? It's not like we're 5 minutes down the street from a hospital. We're out in the middle of the desert where we were performing this experiment. So yeah, the fact that it became an insanely popular video is good. But in the moment, it was one of the scariest things I've ever been through.
That was my thought, was that after, I mean, there must be a point after the fact where you're kind of glad that it happened the way that it did. I mean, but I know what my feeling would be after one of those things kind of took off. And if my angle was to create a YouTube channel that people were interested in, you find something that people are interested in, you detect that, and then you do more of that.
Yeah.
If I were you, my thought would be, damn, like, so what do I have to do now? Like, what's the next thing that I have to do? Once one of those kind of takes off, was there fear?
When like one of those videos went viral, like fear that this is what I'm going to just have to keep doing?
Yes.
No, there was definitely no fear of this is what you have to keep doing, because we aspire to tell content that has a bit of edge, is fast paced, but is really giving you that education. If we can put a conservation spin in there, for us, that's what's most valuable. Now, 95% of the audience out there would probably say to you, yes, we love it when Coyote's getting messed up by something. And we know that. And we do like to reward the audience and say, look, we're still going to give you some of that content. Now, could I go out and only do extreme stuff? Yes, I absolutely could. But here's where the problem then lies. The society that is the world of animals and conservation and education, people that write scientific papers, people that are truly credible in the world of animals will only look at me as the jackass that intentionally gets bit or stung by things for views. That is not the direction that we want to just be known for. Like, we want to be raising money for wildlife reserves. We want to raise $500,000 for Congo. We want to raise $1 million for rhinos in South Africa. You know what I mean? Making content like that ends up holding more clout at the end of the day because of the good that it's doing versus anything that becomes views and celebrity on the internet, so to speak, if that makes sense.
What do you think it is that makes people want to watch somebody in like excruciating pain?
I mean, it's the same with like UFC. They want to see people in pain. It's just.
But I don't want to watch that, but I will watch him get bit by things.
Mm-hmm. I mean,
well, yeah, I mean, it's a good question. Like UFC, I mean, you know, WWF, you know, why do people love horror movies? Who wants to go to a movie and sit there and watch tragic things happen to other humans? It's a weird, visceral human thing that we like our emotions to be pushed to a certain edge. And I think where we got sort of a lightning in the bottle experience with Brave Wilderness was people just didn't think that I would go through with these things. And that's when the term clickbait was sort of coined, where there were a lot of people on YouTube, specifically vloggers and stuff like that, that were like, whoa, crazy moment. And they would give you a thumbnail and a title, and you'd watch a 10-minute video and be like, dude, nothing that you titled this or thumbnailed it was part of the video. Yet here's us with these giant alien looking insects and a finger and a stinger. And you're like, dude, really there's no way. And then when you see me catch this thing, and then you see me at the table, and then you see me like, they're like, is this really happening? And then to see it, and to always be able to get that shot where you can see the stinger go in, you can see my arm swelling, like we don't fake it. You know what I mean? It really was happening. And I think people just gravitated towards that because they're so afraid of these animals. Really think about it. It doesn't matter what it is that I've been bitten or stung by, the fear of being bitten by an alligator or a centipede or stung by a giant tarantula hawk, for most people is the worst case nightmare scenario. So for them to be able to watch it happen to somebody else, way better than ever experiencing it yourself.
Well, so do you have any kids?
I do. I have a 14-year-old daughter.
A 14-year-old daughter?
Mm-hmm.
What is it like for her to watch those things?
Well, I went from being a super cool dad when she was younger to then being a dad that was way too recognizable in public and who all of her friends watch at school. And now she's finally transitioned to that point where having a dad that is recognized and whose friends are watching their dad is back to a cool thing. So I'm in a real good spot with that. But she loves animals. She's definitely more into like the being a 14-year-old girl side of things than she is wanting to go out and catch frogs and snakes with me at this day and age. But she definitely has a huge appreciation for the natural world, the animals themselves, and that she admires the building of the brand that is Brave Wilderness, right? So she's also grown up with me influencing her with Spielberg and Lucas and Night Shyamalan and all of these incredible filmmakers to say, how do you tell a good story? And then how do you build something that can potentially become a household name? Because it's a lot more difficult today than it was when Steven and George and these guys were coming up through the ranks, because society is so overly saturated with everybody doing this on their phone, wanting to be the next stars. So whether you make it to being a star or you make it to actually building a recognized brand is tougher than you would think, as you guys know.
Yeah. So what's next? I mean, we know you're working on conservation. You're still making videos. Do you have any future plans that you're excited about besides those things?
Oh yeah, man. We have so many irons in the fire. It's crazy. We've got a really big partnership that we're getting ready to announce in June. I can't say what it is yet because it's getting announced publicly, but when you guys see who I'm teaming up with, I think you'll be like, wow, that made complete sense. It's about to change the animal adventure survival landscape of things. So huge partnership that's about to get announced in June surrounding this rhino episode and the launch of this conservation initiative. We've got an animated series that's in the works right now that just got greenlit for development. We're about to launch an internship program with the Ohio State University where I went to college, on top of producing multiple locations this year. Now that COVID is allowed us to get back to a sense of normal, we can travel internationally much more fluidly at this point. So there is so much happening for us right now. It's like every day is a new adventure, but we're incredibly blessed to have the audience that we have and the ability to essentially master and command our own ship and direction within the entertainment industry, which is such a unique thing nowadays, and to have withstood as long as we have on YouTube. So we're in our 8th year of YouTube content distribution at this point. And we feel like we're becoming the old guys on YouTube, but still rather relevant at the end of the day, which is kind of fun.
That's awesome. What's the craziest thing that that you've learned about the animal kingdom? Because I heard you talking one time about the way that the tarantula hawk reproduces, right? And correct me if I'm wrong, they kill a tarantula, drag it down into its own house, and then put their eggs in that tarantula.
Yeah.
Is there something more insane than that? Because that's heavy.
That is heavy.
any parasitic relationship is really pretty crazy at the end of the day when you have something that is using another animal as a host to make its babies happen. It's just so like out of our planetary understanding. Like, can you imagine if something came down from space and was like, cool, humans, we're going to go ahead and lay some eggs on you, and eventually you're going to hatch into this.
In your own house.
That is pretty alien, which actually that could be a pretty good, I feel like M. Night Shyamalan would probably make a movie like that. But, I've seen some pretty weird things, I guess, in the animal kingdom. But the thing that to me is always the most fascinating is how intelligent a lot of these animals really are at the end of the day. And the fact that if you spend a little time with even the seemingly least emotionally driven creatures, they all have a personality. Doesn't matter if it's an insect, an arachnid, or a reptile, an amphibian, even some fish that I've interacted with, right? So I'm getting ready to go do this big white sturgeon episode. And I can tell you from catching a 7.5 foot long alligator gar, which is this prehistoric, aggressive looking animal, it is the most sentient, gentle being on the planet, despite the fact that it has this big mouth and all these razor sharp teeth. And these animals have emotion. They have feelings, and they may not be at the same level that we are when it comes to our style of communication, but they're very much in tune with their environment. They're very much in tune with each other and the other animals that share their space. So I've really gotten the chance over the years to see that, witness it, absorb it, and I think appreciate it at the end of the day.
If there was one thing you wanted everybody to know, whether it's about conservation or whether it's about animal kingdom as a whole, if there was one message from Coyote Peterson, what would it be?
That animals, their environments, and our planet as a whole needs more help right now than any of us are probably willing to commit. And that's what's getting scary. I just watched literally a documentary this morning on my flight back called Ice on Fire. Leo DiCaprio produced it. Appian, his company, did. And he actually did the voiceover for it. Fascinating film, all about the CO2 levels that are rising, and obviously the melting of our masses of ice. And we all are capable of recognizing the math and the statistics and being shown and told what's happening. It's a lot different for people to actually take action. It's one thing to say, oh gosh, this is terrible. So human civilization is really going to be pretty messed up 50 years from now. Well, I am 70, so oh well, it sucks for everybody else coming after me. For the next generation right now, people my daughter's age, or if you guys have any kids, like, it is going to affect them more than anybody. So I think my big initiative, my business partner Mark's, Brave Wilderness as a whole, is to get the older audience to recognize, really truly recognize it. If you can financially get involved or physically get involved, roll the dice, do it, because our planet needs the help. When it comes to the next generation, it's about showing them the atrocities that are happening, and whether that's melting of ice caps or it's rhinos being poached so that their horns can be ground down into powder for false medicinal purposes. Like, what? Rhino horns aren't even ivory. They're made out of keratin. Like, we might as well be going to barber shops and sweeping up the hair and melting that down into pills to give to people. Maybe that'll give you more sexual vitality if you're, eating people's shed hair. You know what I mean? It's essentially the same thing at the end of the day. So if we can get the next generation to recognize that sharks are not our enemies, that rhino horns should not be taken, that polar bears are drowning by the dozens because they don't have enough ice to relax on in between hunting for seals, maybe something will actually happen that will change the future over the course of the next 50 to 100 years. Because if it doesn't happen, we're done. We're going to be living in pods, or hopefully we'll be living in space at that point, because we're in a lot of trouble, and it's really happening.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead.
I was just going to say, do you have more for him?
No, I was going for a thank you.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for your time. I was doing the same thing. I just want to make sure on the same page. And also, could you have your lady send me that link? I kind of want to donate. You didn't ask for anything here, and we just really appreciate it. So I want to give back a little if I can.
Oh yeah, no, man, it's all good. I was so thrilled to be on the podcast, man. I think what you guys are doing is awesome. You got to take those risks. And like we start talking about at the beginning, I'm a super approachable guy, and like, always admire anybody that's like, you know what, this is what I'm going to do. starting a podcast, starting a YouTube channel, start my own TikTok, whatever it is. If you're a storyteller, if you've got a passion, whether it's in the world of animals or the art of whatever it might be, do it. Go after the people that you don't think would want to get involved, because you never know who you might catch on the right day, who's got that hour or who's got that right connection. And that's how the entertainment industry really works. And it's closed off to a lot of people. But I think with this evolution of digital technology and the distribution space of the internet, everybody's becoming more accessible. And if we all work together to help each other build on each other's projects, it's only going to be for the better. So I'm happy to share with you guys information about the Rhino Conservation Initiative once we get closer to actually launching it in June. And hopefully guys check out the episode. And if you share the concept anywhere, we would be more than thrilled for that.
I love it, man. Thank you so much for your time.
Appreciate
it.
Yeah, you're welcome, guys. Thanks so much for having me on the show.
Have a good one.